Before we dive in, hit that subscribe, like, and drop a comment if you think you could survive a night inside Rikers Island, because after hearing this story, you might just change your mind. Rikers, a place whispered about in every correctional facility in America. But this isn't about the violence, the gangs, or the corruption you think you know. This is about what's buried beneath it. It started with a map, a crumpled, coffee-stained map passed between two inmates during a cell inspection. A sketch that showed something no one was supposed to know existed. Beneath Rikers Island, under decades of concrete, rot, and pain were tunnels. Not official maintenance shafts or sewage lines, something older. Something that shouldn't be there. The story broke open one cold November night when inmate Luis "Ghost" Alvarez went missing. He wasn't a rookie. Ghost had survived 6 years inside Rikers without a single write-up. Then, without warning, he vanished. No signs of escape, no footage on the cameras, no alarms triggered. Just gone. When officers tore apart his cell, they found a single piece of paper hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible. On it, drawn in faint pencil, was the same map. At the bottom were 5 words that chilled investigators to their bones. Below the yard. Follow the hum. Days later, whispers spread through the blocks. Stories of inmates hearing strange vibrations coming from the lower levels at night, like machinery running deep underground. Some said it was just the prison's heating system. Others claimed it was something else. But the truth was, this wasn't the first time someone disappeared at Rikers without explanation. In 1989, 3 inmates from the now-demolished Modular Unit South vanished during a riot. Records said they were transferred, but no documentation ever surfaced. Not a single trace. When investigators reopened Ghost's case, they uncovered an eerie pattern. Each missing inmate had been housed in the same area, Block D, near the old service tunnels sealed off decades ago. The official story claimed those tunnels were collapsed during renovations in the 70s. But recent blueprints told a different story. The tunnels still existed, and one of them led directly beneath the East River. So the question wasn't if the tunnels were real, it was who was using them. And before the warden could even begin to act, another inmate, a known informant, claimed he'd seen Ghost alive, walking through the steam under the laundry block 2 nights after his disappearance. By dawn, that informant was dead. The official report said suicide. But inside Rikers, no one believed that. By the time word of Ghost's disappearance hit the cell blocks, Rikers was already boiling with tension. Inmates weren't just scared, they were watching. Every creak in the walls, every hum of the pipes, now carried a different kind of weight. Some said the tunnels were real. Others whispered they were a death trap used by guards to make problems disappear. Among those who refused to believe the official story was Derek "Slim" Nolan, a lifer for Brooklyn who'd been locked up since 2002. Slim wasn't one for ghost stories, but he'd seen things in Rikers that never made it into reports. Guards smuggling drugs through sealed-off corridors, contractors who came in for repairs and never came back. Slim started asking questions. Dangerous ones. He spoke to an old janitor named Marvin, one of the few staff who'd been around since the 80s. At first, Marvin wouldn't say a word, but after a pack of cigarettes and a quiet promise that his name wouldn't leave Slim's lips, he leaned in and whispered, "They ain't myths, kid. The tunnels are real. And they go deep, real deep." Marvin said the tunnels were part of an old construction project during the 1930s, built for supply transport and emergency evacuation. But sometime in the late 70s, after a series of inmate escapes, the system was sealed and forgotten. Forgotten, except by those who used them. Slim couldn't shake it. If Ghost had found a way down there, and if someone wanted to keep it quiet, then this was more than just an escape. It was a cover-up. He began mapping out his surroundings, sketching details from memory, vent locations, pipe routes, floor slopes. Every night, he compared notes with a few trusted inmates who'd worked in maintenance. One of them, Rico, claimed he once saw a guard disappear behind a wall panel in the old laundry room. 3 nights later, Slim and Rico made a move. They waited until lights out, then pried open the rusted vent behind cell 204. It led into a narrow crawl space filled with dust and the stench of rot. The deeper they crawled, the louder the sound became, a low, mechanical hum, faint but steady. It wasn't the sound of pipes. It wasn't airflow either. It was rhythmic, industrial, like something running. They followed it until they hit a dead end. But before turning back, Slim noticed something strange. A concrete slab, slightly off color from the rest, its edge smeared with what looked like oil or old grease. He pressed his ear to it. The hum was louder there. He reached for his shank to wedge it open, but before he could move, the crawl space filled with light. Rico froze. Someone had opened the vent behind them. A voice, deep, calm, familiar, echoed through the narrow space. "You boys lost." It was Officer Malone, one of the oldest guards in Rikers. A man known for being everywhere and nowhere at once. Slim didn't answer. Malone's flashlight cut through the dark, landing square on the map, clutched in Slim's hand. "Sit," Malone said softly. Some doors were sealed for a reason. Then he smiled, a cold, deliberate smile, and motioned for them to crawl back out. Neither Slim nor Rico spoke the rest of the night. But after that encounter, something changed. Rico wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk, wouldn't sleep. 2 days later, he was found hanging in his cell. And written on the wall in his own blood were the same 5 words found on Ghost's map. "Below the yard. Follow the hum." The morning after Rico's death, Rikers went into lockdown. Guards stormed Block D, tearing through cells, stripping mattresses, and turning over every piece of contraband they could find. But Slim knew what it really was, a message. Someone wanted the inmates quiet. Rico's death wasn't the first time someone got too close to the truth and ended up gone. But now, Slim wasn't just chasing rumors. He had proof, the greasy mark on the tunnel slab, the identical words on 2 dead men's notes, and that sound under the floor that wouldn't leave his head. When the lockdown lifted, Slim managed to slip into the boiler room under the pretext of janitorial duty. The air was thick with steam and rust. The walls groaned with age. It was here, he believed, the hum originated. As he moved deeper, the smell changed from burning oil to damp, old air. That's when he noticed something odd. The grates near the far wall were welded shut, except one. It had been recently cut open, the metal edges still bright and sharp. Someone had been there. He stepped closer and saw it, faintly carved into the concrete near the base. LA 2022. Ghost initials. Slim's pulse quickened. He knelt, tracing the letters with his finger. The cut vent led downward into a black void. A ladder was bolted to the side, disappearing into darkness. For a second, he hesitated. Going down there meant no turning back. But curiosity is a dangerous thing in prison. It eats at you until there's nothing left. Slim gripped the ladder and began to descend. The further he went, the colder the air became. The hum was louder now, echoing through the tunnel walls. His breathing slowed. The smell of metal and mold filled his nose. When his feet finally hit the floor, he turned his flashlight on and froze. The tunnel was massive, wider than he'd imagined. Old brick and concrete, dripping water, wires hanging like veins. But what caught his attention wasn't the structure. It was the footprints in the dust. Fresh. He followed them carefully, turning corners, counting steps. The tunnel branched off into several smaller corridors. Some were sealed with iron gates. Others led to dead ends. Then he found it, the door. Steel, with a small slot at eye level. He peeked through. Inside was a makeshift workshop. Floodlights, tables, crates, even security monitors showing live feeds of prison corridors, ones that weren't supposed to exist. In the corner stood a man in uniform, sleeves rolled up, adjusting a radio transmitter. It was Officer Malone. He wasn't alone. Next to him stood 2 men in plain clothes, their faces half hidden in the glare. They were talking quietly, the sound muffled by the steel. Slim pressed his ear to the door just in time to catch a fragment. "Move the next group tonight. No records, no trace." His stomach dropped. "Move the next group? Who are they talking about? Inmates? Workers? Transfers?" Before he could think, the radio on one of the tables crackled. "Unit 4 to base. Prisoner Slim Nolan is missing from assignment." Malone turned toward the door. His eyes met the peephole. Slim's heart stopped. Malone said nothing. He just smiled again, that same cold, knowing smile. Then, the lights went out. The entire tunnel fell into darkness. And above him, Rikers Island rumbled as sirens began to wail. When Slim came to, his wrists were bound. His flashlight was gone. The air around him was damp and metallic, the kind of air you only breathe underground. Somewhere above, the faint echo of boots pounded on concrete. He tried to move, but sharp pain in his shoulder reminded him he wasn't alone. A voice came from the shadows. "You shouldn't have gone down there." It was Malone, calm as ever, almost disappointed. Slim blinked through the dark, trying to make out his surroundings. He was sitting against a wall in what looked like an old storage chamber. Rusted pipes, broken lockers, a single flickering bulb overhead. Malone paced slowly in front of him, hands in his pockets. "I told you," Malone said. "Some doors were sealed for a reason." Slim spat on the floor. "You killed Rico." Malone stopped. "No," he replied coldly. "Rico killed himself. This place does that to people who see too much." He crouched down beside Slim and pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat. "You ever wonder why the same men disappear and no one files a report?" He tossed the paper onto Slim's lap. "Go ahead, read it." Slim unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a transfer list, inmates being relocated to other facilities. Except the names didn't match any active prisons. Some were crossed out, others marked with red stamps that simply read, "Cleared." Ghost's name was there. So was Rico's. And at the bottom, Derek Nolan. Slim looked up, his blood turning cold. "What is this?" Malone smirked. "Insurance. We make sure the ones who can't be controlled don't stay long enough to become problems." "Where do you send them?" Malone leaned closer. "Below," he whispered, "where the cameras don't reach." He stood up, straightened his uniform, and headed toward the steel door. "You'll be joining them soon. Maybe then you'll stop asking questions." The lock clicked. His footsteps faded. Slim sat in silence, the hum returning faintly in the distance. He could barely think over the pounding in his chest. Below, whatever that meant, he had no intention of finding out the hard way. He started scanning the room. There, in the corner, an old ventilation grate half loose from the wall. He twisted his wrists against the metal tie, scraping until blood slicked his skin. After what felt like hours, the ties gave way. He crawled toward the grate, pried it open, and slipped inside. The duct was tight, every movement echoing painfully. He dragged himself forward inch by inch until the air shifted, colder again, and filled with that steady, unrelenting hum. When he emerged, he was standing in another tunnel. But this one wasn't empty. Along the walls were wooden crates, stacked neatly, each marked with an inmate number. He brushed the dust off one and read the label. Inside wasn't paperwork. It was clothing, IDs, and personal effects. Belongings of the missing. Rico's shirt, ghost chain, dozens of others. And all of them marked cleared. At the far end of the tunnel, a faint light glowed through a doorway. Slim crept closer, his footsteps silent. Through the crack, he saw a group of men, guards and outsiders, moving equipment, sealing boxes, and marking new names on a clipboard. He strained to read the top line. The date was tomorrow. The heading read, "Transfer Schedule." The first name on the list, Derek Nolan. He didn't need to read the rest. He knew what that meant. Slim backed away, quietly, heart hammering, until his foot hit something on the floor, a loose wrench. It clattered against the concrete. The men inside turned. "Who's there?" Flashlights swept across the tunnel. Slim ran. Behind him, voices shouted, boots thundered, and the hum roared louder than ever, like the tunnels themselves were alive. He turned a corner and slammed straight into a steel door. It didn't budge. He pounded on it, desperate, until he felt a latch above and yanked it open. He climbed. The ladder shook with each step. Above him, a faint glimmer of light leaked through a hatch. He pushed it open and burst out into the freezing night air. He was standing in the middle of the prison yard. But no alarms blared. No siren screamed. It was quiet. Too quiet. And when he looked back, the hatch was gone, replaced by smooth, undisturbed concrete. Slim barely slept that night. He lay on his bunk, eyes fixed on the ceiling, pretending to breathe slow as guards passed by. His hands still stung from the ladder rungs. The image of that transfer list burned in his mind. He'd climbed out of the ground, but the truth was still buried beneath it. By dawn, he had made up his mind. If Malone and his crew were running something under Rikers, there had to be records. Even the most corrupt operation leaves a paper trail. There was only one place that could hold it, the file room in the old administration wing. Hardly anyone went there now, except officers on audit duty. If he could get in, he might find proof of what happened to Ghost, Rico, and the others. He waited until lunch rotation. The guards were distracted, the tier noisy. Slim slipped out of line, took a service corridor, and crept toward the admin side. The file room sat at the end of a long hallway behind a rusted steel door marked Archives 3C. He forced it open just enough to slide through. Inside, dust filled the air like fog. Rows of cabinets stretched wall to wall. Yellowed folders, cracked binders, files that hadn't seen daylight in years. He moved carefully, scanning labels, medical transfers, disciplinary reports, facility renovations. Then, on the bottom drawer of a locked cabinet, he saw it. Special operations, restricted. The lock was old. A few strikes from a metal rod cracked it open. He pulled the drawer out, flipping through folders until one name stopped him cold. Project HOLLOWGROUND. He opened it. Inside were blueprints of the tunnels, complete layouts, old and new. Red markers circled access points that were still active. Notes in the margins read, Phase 2, logistics completed. Tunnel 7 operational. At the back of the file were photographs, grainy, black and white, dated 1991. They showed men in uniform moving inmates through underground corridors. Each photo stamped, property of NIDOC Confidential. But one picture froze him completely. It showed Officer Malone, 20 years younger, standing beside a group of prisoners, one of whom looked exactly like Ghost. Slim's throat went dry. Ghost hadn't escaped. He'd been part of something that had started long before either of them ever got locked up. The sound of footsteps broke his trance. He stuffed the documents under his shirt and ducked behind a cabinet. The door creaked open. Two guards stepped in, talking in low voices. Malone said we're shutting down Phase 2 tonight. What about the files? Already being moved. Warden doesn't want anything left behind. Slim's pulse hammered. If they found him, it was over. The guards' radios crackled. Unit 12, meet at the boiler room. Transfer in 15. They turned and left. Slim waited until the echo of their boots disappeared, then bolted for the door. He had the proof now. All he needed was a way out, a way to get those files to someone on the outside. He slipped back toward the main blocks, tucking the folder deep inside his mattress. But when he entered his cell, his stomach dropped. Malone was sitting on his bunk, hands folded, calm, waiting. Looking for this? He said, holding up the torn lock from the file room. Slim froze. You just couldn't help yourself, could you? Malone sighed. You had to dig where no one asked you to dig. He stood, walked slowly to the bars, and whispered, You think anyone's going to believe you? You're a convict. A number. You disappear, and no one blinks. Then he turned to leave, stopping only to add, Enjoy your last night, Nolan. Tomorrow, you're getting transferred. The door slammed behind him. Slim sat in silence, his pulse pounding in his ears. He knew what transfer meant now. He had one night to survive or vanish like the rest. The moment Malone's footsteps faded, Slim's mind went into overdrive. He had less than 24 hours, maybe less, before he'd become just another name stamped cleared. The only thing keeping him alive now was the file hidden inside his mattress, but he knew Malone wouldn't wait until morning. Slim needed a plan. Fast. He replayed every detail in his mind. The tunnels, the vents, the hatch in the yard. Somewhere down there, beneath all the lies, had to be an exit. One that didn't lead back to Malone's men. If Ghost had really made it out, that route still existed. When lights out came, Slim made his move. He jammed the lock on his cell just before count, faking it closed. When the guards passed, he waited, then slipped into the corridor. The air was thick, the silence alive. He carried nothing but a makeshift shank and the stolen file. His destination, the boiler room, the heart of Rikers, the source of the hum. He crept down service stairs, avoiding patrol lights. until he reached the heavy steel door. It was unlocked. The hinges groaned as he pulled it open. The heat hit him instantly, steam, oil, sweat. The pipes hissed like snakes in the dark. Slim moved between them, down the same narrow path he'd taken before, until he reached the vent where he'd first seen Ghost's initials. The cut metal was still there. He climbed in. The tunnel greeted him like a tomb, cold, wet, and humming with low vibrations. He retraced his steps, the file strapped under his shirt, the flashlight trembling in his hand. Somewhere behind him, a metal clang echoed. Then another. He wasn't alone. He moved faster. The tunnel forked, left toward the old service chambers, right toward the sealed passage he'd never explored. He went right. The air grew colder, the hum louder. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber lined with concrete pillars. In the center stood a rusted freight elevator, its doors pried open. Next to it, a sign barely legible under grime. T7 access, authorized personnel only. Tunnel 7, the one marked operational. Slim stepped inside. The elevator floor was damp and littered with old chains. He found a lever and yanked it down. The machinery groaned to life, gears screeching as the platform began to sink. The descent felt endless. The deeper he went, the darker it got, until even the hum became something else. A pulse, a rhythm, almost mechanical breathing. When the elevator finally stopped, Slim stepped into what looked like an underground facility. Rows of old prison cots lined the walls. Tables covered in files, syringes, uniforms, and cameras, recording equipment, all running silently. Then he saw it. A wall filled with inmate photographs, each pinned beneath a red, cleared stamp. Every missing man, every ghost story Rikers ever buried. And at the bottom, a new photo being taped in place. Derek Slim Nolan, a sound behind him. He spun around. Malone stood in the doorway, gun in hand. "You just had to see it for yourself," Malone said quietly. "This isn't a prison, Nolan. It's a filter. The ones we can't fix, we process. No witnesses, no noise." Slim stared at him, rage cutting through fear. "You think this'll stay hidden forever?" Malone stepped closer, smirking. "Who's gonna tell?" "You." Slim's grip tightened around the file. "No," he said slowly. "But they will." He tossed the folder into one of the burning barrels nearby. Flames caught instantly, eating through the pages. Malone cursed and raised the gun, but before he could fire, the heat triggered something in the wall behind him. A pressure valve exploded. Steam burst through the chamber, scalding hot and blinding. The lights flickered. Sirens screamed. Slim ducked behind a pillar as Malone fired wildly into the smoke. He ran, through the haze, past the cots, down another corridor that sloped upward. The roar of machinery chased him. Somewhere ahead, a faint draft, air that didn't belong underground. He followed it, stumbling, coughing, until he saw daylight bleeding through a grated door. He pushed with everything he had. The metal gave way, and Slim emerged into open air, chest heaving, clothes soaked, eyes burning from the smoke. He was outside the main fence on the edge of the East River. Behind him, the ground rumbled. A low, heavy collapse echoed beneath Rikers Island. The tunnels were caving in. Slim fell to his knees, watching as plumes of dust rose into the night sky. The hum was gone. Silence reclaimed the island. But he knew it wasn't over. Malone's operation had been buried, maybe even erased, but the truth still existed in fragments, blueprints, whispers, and the few files he'd memorized. He pulled one last piece of paper from his pocket, a torn corner of the Project Hollow Ground file, and tucked it into his shoe. Then, fading sirens approached. Boats. Police. He stood, ready to surrender, knowing they'd never believe what he'd seen. But at least this time, he wasn't disappearing quietly. When Slim woke up, he was handcuffed to a hospital bed. His head throbbed, lungs burning from smoke inhalation. The ceiling above him was white, too clean, too bright to be Rikers. For the first time in years, he could breathe air that didn't smell like rust or fear. A detective sat across the room, his badge catching the morning light. "Derek Nolan," he said. "You're a hard man to track down." Slim didn't answer. His throat was dry, his voice cracked. The detective continued, flipping open a folder. You were found near the East River shoreline. The fire department reported a partial collapse under Rikers. You want to tell me how you ended up there? Slim looked out the window. From his bed, he could see smoke still rising in the distance. Rikers Island, half hidden behind a haze of dust and denial. He turned back slowly. You wouldn't believe me if I did. The detective leaned forward. Try me. Slim took a breath, steady and deliberate. They've been running something down there for decades, under the prison. Moving inmates. Erasing names. Every one of them marked, cleared. The detective frowned. That's a hell of an accusation. You got proof. Slim stared at his hands, remembering the flames, the collapsing tunnels, the faces pinned to the wall. Not anymore, he said quietly. But they do. He nodded toward the folder in the detective's lap. Curious, the detective flipped it open, revealing a single photo sealed inside an evidence sleeve. It showed the ruins of the underground chamber, the wall of faces. And there, in the bottom corner, faint but unmistakable, Officer Malone, half buried in debris, eyes open, staring straight at the camera. The detective looked up. Who was he? Slim smiled weakly. The man who tried to bury the truth. He leaned back, exhaling slow. But truth don't stay buried forever. 2 weeks later, the story hit every major outlet. Partial collapse at Rikers reveals unmarked tunnels beneath facility. Officials called them abandoned infrastructure. They denied everything. But the whispers didn't stop. Inmate families demanded answers. Investigations were launched, records subpoenaed. Every name marked cleared was rechecked. And sure enough, dozens of missing inmate reports were quietly reopened. But Slim? He vanished from protective custody 3 days before his scheduled testimony. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just an empty bed and a single note taped to the wall. It read, "Below the yard. Follow the home." And to this day, no one knows whether Derek Slim, Nolan escaped, or if Rikers simply took him back. Some say, on quiet nights, guards still hear the faint sound of machinery deep beneath the floors, a low, steady hum that wasn't there before. Whether it's the echo of the past, or something still running down there, no one really knows. But one thing's certain, Rikers Island holds secrets that refuse to die. If this story sent chills down your spine, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and smash that like, because this is just one of the many dark secrets hiding behind prison walls. Share this video if you believe the truth about Rikers Island deserves to be heard. And remember, not every escape ends with freedom. Some end with silence.